Looking for the ultimate crispy roasted potato recipe? Well, look no further, you found it. These golden beauties are roasted in olive oil and perfectly seasoned with garlic and fresh herbs. They have a crispy outside and a fluffy inside. Simple, flavorful, and guaranteed to be the star of your Christmas table. For the full ingredient list, check the description box below, but enough talking, let's get cooking. So let's take a look at some of the ingredients that we're gonna use for this recipe. For the potato, we're gonna choose a Yukon Gold potato. You can do this recipe with russet potatoes. Russet potatoes are probably the potato that gets the crispiest by far, but when you make this recipe with the russet potatoes, it doesn't get as creamy on the inside. And I think the best part about making these potatoes, it has both a crispy exterior and a nice soft inside. And the Yukon Gold potato, when treated right, will get crispy on the outside, not as crispy as the russet potato, but crispy enough and super creamy on the inside. So we're gonna go with these Yukon Gold potatoes. But if you really like the russet potatoes, or that's just what you got, go ahead and use them. Do exactly everything that we're gonna do in this video just with the russet potatoes. We're also gonna need some fresh garlic. This is more garlic than we're gonna use, and I usually go overboard on garlic. Do whatever's right for you. And some fresh herbs. Here I got some rosemary, and here I got some fresh thyme, or thyme, however you pronounce it. Is it thyme or thyme? I don't know. So before we take care of our potatoes, we're gonna season the water that the potatoes are going in. We're not gonna boil the water and then put the potatoes into boiling water, but we're gonna start them off in cold water. We wanna season the water a little bit, so we're gonna use this Better Than Bouillon chicken paste that I'm gonna dissolve in a little bit of water. And the reason I'm gonna do this is because I don't wanna use a whole bunch of stock and waste all that stock and then have to throw it out. But this stuff is rather inexpensive and it's a great flavor. So I'm gonna take about a tablespoon of this and mix this in this warm water, and just to dissolve this a little bit before I put this inside the water that the potatoes are going to go in. And if this water's not hot enough, I can just use a whisk to mix it in there. And this is just concentrated flavor. Again, I could use stock, but I don't want to use 2 boxes of chicken stock that we're eventually just going to throw out. But a little tablespoon of this mixed in with some water, and we get the same exact effect. The first step to dealing with these potatoes is we got to peel them. So we're going to take our peeler and we're going to peel these potatoes. You don't have to go crazy peeling them. I feel like if you just leave the tiny little bit of skin in some spots, it actually is okay. But we definitely want to make sure that we take off any of like the potato eyes or any of like the rotten spots that we're looking for. You know, potatoes are imperfect. They grow inside the ground. They got some funky spots that you might need to take care of, especially like this. And I'll just keep taking my peeler. Actually, this one doesn't look like that we're going to be able to take a peeler to. Might need to cut that off. So while you're peeling your potatoes, you can see if there are any spots that are a little rotten. Definitely want to cut those out. You know, I'm already 2 potatoes in and I've already got 2 rotten spots. So, you know, a good tip would be always start off with more potatoes than you think that you need, because you never know how much rotten that you got to cut out. You know, potatoes are one of those things that they may look good on the outside, but then once you start cutting into them, then they all start don't looking too great. Finally, the first potato didn't have any rotten spots, at least on the outside. Peeling potatoes and cutting out the rotten spots of potatoes, something people have done since the beginning of time. And, you know, peeling them is a great way for you to introduce yourself to the potato and see what's going on. So one of the reasons I like to use the Yukon Gold potatoes is they are very round as compared to the russet potatoes that are pretty oblong, because we want these potatoes to be really large chunks, really maximize the amount of creaminess on the inside. These are going to be more like 2 to 3 bite potatoes than they are 1 biters. So we're going to cut this potato in half, and then we're going to cut the potato again in half into quarters. As you cut the potato, if you see any rotten spots, you can just cut those out. But we're going to try to leave these potatoes in rather large chunks, way larger than we normally would do for roasted potatoes. And as we're cutting them, we're putting them right inside of our pot so we can put the potatoes right inside the pot. Then we fill up the water right to the potato line, as opposed to add the water, boil the water, and then put the potatoes in after. It also helps to get potatoes of similar size, so if you can hand pick your potatoes, that's always going to be best. So when you cut them up, that the sizes of their pieces are going to be really uniform. You wouldn't want to do this and quarter little potatoes and then big potatoes, because then your sizes are going to be all off. You want everything to cook at about the same rate. See, like this potato is a little bit smaller, so rather than cut it into quarters, I'm just actually going to leave it like this in halves. Now to our pot of potatoes, we're going to add the dissolved chicken bouillon paste inside the water, so that's going to help season the water. Another thing that we're going to put in is going to be just a little bit of baking soda. This is going to help change the pH of the water, which is really going to help the potatoes get nice and crispy on the outside. And for this, I'll take about a teaspoon and I'll just toss this in some of the water that we're going to put inside the pot here. So now I'll take this water and I'll fill up the pot until we get about an inch or two above the potatoes. And the reason we're doing it this way and not boiling the water and then adding the potatoes is we don't want to cook the potatoes all the way through very evenly. We just really want to cook the outside of the potatoes so they get nice and crispy. Most of the cooking of the inside potato is going to happen inside the oven. So when we do it this way, as the water heats up, it really is just cooking the outside because the water never got a chance to get really hot. And once it's boiling, we're only going to leave it for about 5 to 10 minutes until it's really fork tender, and the outside will be cooked a little bit more than the inside. So let's give this a cover. We're going to put this on the stove. We're going to bring it up to a boil, and we're going to boil it for about 5-10 minutes until the potatoes are knife tender. So now let's talk what we're going to roast these potatoes in. So here I got a nice heavy duty roasting pan. You could do this on a sheet pan, but the roasting pan is definitely going to be the way to go because we want these potatoes to cook in a decent amount of oil, almost like simulating what would happen in a pan, but with all the heat around it. So this is a nice heavy bottomed roasting pan that has enough room for all the potatoes to spread out really nicely. One extra step that I'm going to do is I already got my oven preheated to 400 degrees with the convection setting on. I'm going to put this in there while the potatoes are boiling, so the pan itself, it gets hot and we're not putting a cold pan in there. The reason we want to do this is we're going to put the oil in here and we're going to get it nice and hot, so when we take those boiled potatoes and add them in here, they're going to sizzle right from the go and start to get crispy on the outside, as opposed to putting a cold pan in and waiting for some time for the heat to get to the potatoes. I'm going to use the convection setting because this is going to give a chance for hot air to blow around. It's going to make these potatoes really crispy on the outside. If you don't have a convection setting on your oven, use a slightly higher temperature like 425, 450 in the oven, because you're going to want the oven to get really hot in order for these potatoes to get nice and crispy. But if you have the convection setting on, 400, 415 is good. If you don't, 425, 450. So these potatoes have been boiling for about 8 minutes. If I check one with a knife, the knife should easily pierce all the way through, nice and easy with no resistance. So these are good to go. So I'm going to use the spider and take these out. I'm going to place them inside this colander so they get a chance to dry out and drain before we season them. I'm going to let these potatoes steam dry for about like 2 to 3 minutes inside the colander with the bowl underneath. So the bowl underneath will catch any moisture that's dripping off of them, even though much isn't if I use the spider. And we're also letting moisture evaporate from the outside of the potatoes. That's just gonna help the outside get nice and crispy. The drier the outside of the potato is when we hit them with the oil and the seasoning, the crispier these things have a chance to get in the roasting pan. So I've let these chill out for about 2 to 3 minutes. They're still steaming and still drying, but they're way cooler than they were before. Before we take these out of the colander and put them in our seasoning bowl, I'm gonna rough them up with the colander, because the colander has a rough surface on the inside, and you can see that as I shake these around and give them a toss, the outside of these potatoes is getting beat up, and as it gets beat up and roughed up, that's what's going to allow these potatoes to get super crispy. So the outside of these potatoes should look a little rough and a little messed up, and that is perfect for them to be seasoned now. So now to these potatoes, we're gonna add a couple tablespoons of some olive oil. Some of my base seasoning. This is a blend of garlic powder, onion powder, salt, and pepper. And some smoked paprika. The smoked paprika is going to add a really nice red color. It's also going to add a really nice smoky flavor element inside here. There's not many ingredients, so adding a little smoke flavor would really enhance this and make this a really nice roasted potato dish. So I don't need to be super gentle, but I don't want to break any of the potatoes, but I'm going to give these a mix with this wooden spatula and get them well coated with the spices and the olive oil. So my roasting pan is very hot right now. It's been in the oven the entire time those potatoes were boiling. We're gonna take some olive oil and we're gonna coat the bottom of this until we can't see any more of the surface underneath there. We want these potatoes to almost kind of like roasting pan fry inside there. So we definitely want a lot of oil in there. For a pan this size, it's probably gonna be a cup, but usually what I do is I just pour it in until I can't see the bottom anymore and it's all nice and covered. A lot of these recipes sometimes use duck fat and beef tallow, and if you want to do that, totally, but my cholesterol is not really in check, so I got to be a little careful about that, and filling up the pan full of beef fat or duck fat, just not really my thing. It will get crispy and it will be delicious, and you totally can do that with this same exact recipe. We're just going to do it with olive oil for a little bit of health reasons without sacrificing any flavor or any crispiness. So now we're going to take those seasoned potatoes and put them inside of here. And you can hear that as soon as I put those potatoes in there, they already started to sizzle because the pan is nice and hot. So now I'm gonna spread these potatoes out in here as best as possible. If I put enough potatoes in here, they'll have a little bit of space without being overcrowded. And we wanna be able to get them in a single layer with a little bit of space in between. So you definitely want enough air to flow around so they get crispy without steaming. I'm just making sure that I'm spreading them out as equally as I can. And now before these go back in the oven, a little bit more olive oil all over the top of them. So now these are gonna go back in our preheated oven. We're gonna cook them total for about 45 minutes, but every 10 or 15 minutes, we're gonna take the pan out, we're gonna give them a flip, and we're gonna do that maybe 3 or 4 times over the course of the 45 minutes. So while that's roasting in the oven, we're gonna put a fine mince on some of these fresh herbs and this garlic. We're not putting it in now because if they were in there the whole time, they would eventually burn, especially the garlic. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna chop them up really finely, and towards the end of our cook time in the oven, that's where we're gonna sprinkle on these finely chopped herbs and garlic. So it's gonna give a really nice flavor to the potatoes without burning. For our rosemary, we're simply just gonna peel the rosemary leaves off of the stem. So 3 fingers and pull all the way down. Oh, that one cracked off. We'll just pull it all the way down to take the leaves off. With the end, we'll try to do the same thing. You know, as the rosemary stems get closer to the tip, they become more tender, whereas like the rosemary at the bottom, that's a nice hard woody stem. We definitely don't want that chopped up in there. And now to back up the rosemary, we're gonna use some fresh thyme. The thyme sprigs are a little smaller, but we're basically gonna do the same thing. You just hold it at the end, use 3 fingers and pull the leaves off. Anything towards the top, you can just pull off there too. And you can use dried herbs for this, but it's definitely not gonna have the same impact as the fresh stuff. So if you have fresh, get it, use it. If you are gonna use the dried stuff, I would probably put it in a little bit earlier than the fresh stuff, because the dry stuff can absorb the oils that are inside the pan, and it takes them a little bit of time to release their flavor, as opposed to fresh herbs who are super potent and already have the oils inside there. So now to chop these, we're gonna go rocker chopper. So I put the end of my knife on the cutting board. I put one hand on top, nice open and flat, and I just work my way through the pile, back and forth. As the pile spreads out, I'll push it back together, and I'll just keep repeating that step from different angles until we get the consistency that we're looking for, where it looks nice, even, and small. After a couple passes, I'll just start aiming for the big ones, and as I do that, the stuff around it also gets chopped up. Once these are chopped up, we're gonna transfer these over to a bowl. And now we're gonna do the same thing to a few cloves of garlic. So here I got about 6 cloves of garlic. You can tone the garlic up or down based upon your garlic preference, but maybe you're watching this video around Christmas and you don't cook too much and you don't really work with fresh garlic a lot. My favorite way to peel just a few cloves of garlic is to take the garlic clove, pinch it in between your fingers until you hear a little crack, and then just rub it in between your hands with a little bit of pressure, and the skin will come right off. Now to each one of these garlic cloves, I'm gonna trim off the woody root end. A lot of times when I see people cook, they don't do that, but I taste it in the food. I can tell when, especially when the woody root end is very hard, it doesn't cook down the same as the rest of the garlic, and then you can really like taste the texture difference. And then we're gonna take each one of these and smash them down. And we'll do the same thing that we did to those fresh herbs. And just keep rocker choppering all the way through until it's nice and fine. And we'll just keep repeating that step of just fanning the blade over the garlic, and as the pile spreads out, pushing it all back together. And then garlic sticks to the knife a little bit. We'll just keep and clean that off. There's a lot of tricks that you can do. I find it's just easier just to clean the knife off. So once that garlic is nice and finely minced, we're gonna take that and put it in the same bowl with the chopped up herbs. And now to that, we're gonna add a little olive oil to the chopped up herbs and garlic and a pinch of salt. We're gonna give that a mix, and we're gonna let this garlic and herb mixture just chill out. And like I said, this isn't going in on top of our potatoes until all the way at the end, maybe in the last like 10 to 15 minutes that the potatoes are gonna cook. So our potatoes have been in the oven for about 15 minutes. They're far from done, but what we're gonna do is we're going to flip each one individually and then send these back in the oven. Each time we flip them, it's gonna give a chance for the potatoes on the bottom to get exposed to the air, dry out a little bit, and it also gets an opportunity for the potato on the top to get a dip in the hot oil. Probably the best tool to do this is just your finger and a fork. Just be really careful and take your time to do each one nice and carefully without busting up the potato too much. So now that we flipped each one of these potatoes, these are gonna go back in the oven for another 15 minutes before we flip them again. They've been in there for another 15 minutes. They're definitely looking more crispy on the outside, and I'm gonna do the same thing that I did before. I'm gonna take my fork and my finger and flip these one at a time. I can already tell that they're starting to crisp up really nicely, especially once you flip them over. The crispy side is always gonna be on the bottom. I'm actually gonna hold off on adding the fresh herbs and the garlic that we chopped up until the next flip. I said 45 minutes, but these things are probably gonna be closer to an hour. You know, so much of cooking is you see what's happening and then you figure it out from there. You know, maybe baking, you can give precise times and temperatures, but with cooking, so much of it is adjusting based upon what you see on the fly. So maybe it might take 45 minutes in your oven with the potatoes of your size, but this seems to be taking just a little bit longer. So we're gonna give it a little bit longer. Still being nice and gentle as I flip them. And one thing I'm also gonna do too is I'm gonna turn the temperature up to the oven to 425 and see if that can help them move along a little bit faster. So while I'm flipping these, my oven temperature is coming up a little bit, and maybe that'll get them going a little bit more. You know, all ovens are different, so use what you see to decide what to do. So now these are gonna go in just that slightly hotter oven, so 425, still with the convection setting on, for another 15 minutes. Then we'll flip them, we'll see how they're doing, and at that point we'll probably add the fresh herbs and garlic. So those were in there for another 15 minutes at the slightly higher temperature. Now these things are starting to get super crispy. Let's start to flip these over one at a time, and maybe this will be the perfect time to add the garlic and herbs. So as I start to flip these over, I can already feel that they're starting to get really, really crispy. The higher temperature definitely helped. We started these way too low. So if you're watching this video and you're figuring out temperatures, let's go a little bit north of 400, so like 415, 425, even though earlier in the video I did say 400. And even if you make the same mistake that I did and you started a little bit lower, that's okay. Just add a little bit more time and a higher temperature and you'll get there. So one thing I'm definitely noticing is the potatoes on the outside of the pan are getting way more heat than the potatoes on the inside of the pan. So what I'm gonna do here is I'm just gonna make a few quick flips, or I'm gonna take some that are towards the inside and bring them over to the outside, and take some of the outside and put them on the inside, especially the bigger ones. The bigger ones are the pieces that can get the most crispy on the outside and with the creamiest centers. So these potatoes are looking mighty good. I'm gonna send them in there for another 10 minutes, and then I'm gonna throw the garlic and herbs on them. These potatoes are looking fantastic now that we figured out our temp. So now what we're gonna do is we're gonna take those garlic and herbs that we mixed with the oil and the salt, and now we're gonna take that and we're just gonna give that a sprinkle over the top of these potatoes. I'm gonna try to spread it out as evenly as possible and also on top of the potatoes. Even just adding this to this hot pan smells absolutely fantastic. When they figure out how to get these smells from YouTube to you, oh man, this is gonna be a game changer for all the cooking videos. So now I'm gonna try to just gently toss them around with the garlic and the herbs. At this point, they're all really crispy on the outside, so the chance of damaging them is actually really low. And we're just gonna send this in for another 5, maybe 10 more minutes, just so the garlic and herbs cook a little bit and then crust up on the outside of the potatoes. But now that they're inside the oil, I mean, all these flavors are gonna start to get released, and I'm just gonna keep tossing them around until all the potatoes look like they're really nicely well coated with the oil, the garlic, and the fresh herbs. The smell coming off of these is unreal. Now I'm just trying to scoop up a lot of like the garlic and the herbs that are on the bottom and just like smear them on top of the potatoes. I might not be able to get everyone, but I'm trying to get as many as I can. I'm gonna give these just a little bit of a shake, and these are gonna go back in the oven for just another 5 or 10 more minutes until the garlic and the herbs cook just a tiny little bit, but well before that they burn. So while those potatoes are finishing up in the oven, we just gotta do one more thing. We're gonna take some of this fresh parsley, we're gonna pull the leaves off and chop it up nice and fine, just for a little garnish on the outside. I mean, these potatoes are gonna look great all by themselves, but you sprinkle a little green stuff right on top, you're gonna get a nice pop of color. These things are gonna be beauties. And we don't need much. Every time I chop up parsley, I always chop up more than I need. You can sprinkle this stuff on anything, especially if you're preparing like a holiday meal. I mean, you should have a lot of parsley just already chopped up and sprinkling it on a little bit of everything. It goes in everything. It goes on everything. You know, we're only gonna need a pinch for these potatoes, but I'm sure I'll figure out a way to use the rest of the parsley over the course of the Christmas dinner preparation. And once again, rocker chopper, push the pile together, take your knife, fan it across, and just keep chopping until you get the desired consistency. After a couple of rounds, you'll start seeing some bigger pieces, then some little ones, and just aim for the big pieces. And as you do that, you'll chop up the rest of the things around it. I mean, this is an essential knife skill, and no matter what you're cooking, I always seem to come back to this knife skill. So, you know, if you're a little lacking in knife skills, especially around the holiday time, you know, a little rocker chopper, that'll really amp up your cooking skills, because 80% of cooking is chopping stuff. So if you can get good at that, you get a whole lot better at cooking. Faster, better, everything. The The smell coming out of the oven is unreal right now once we threw that garlic and herbs on top of those potatoes. So once I chop this up, I'm gonna clean up and get those potatoes out of the oven so they can cool a little bit before we try them. These potatoes look and smell absolutely fantastic. Before I take them out, I'm gonna give them a toss in the flavored oil, and then we're gonna pull them out and let them sit on a paper towel for a little bit, just so it absorbs any of the excess oil, and then we'll plate them, and hopefully by then they'll be cool enough that we can taste it without burning our mouth. So here I'm gonna take that same silicone spatula, and I'm choosing to use the silicone because it's a little bit more gentle than using the wood. And I'm just gonna give them a nice toss, because remember, this oil is now infused with the flavors of the herb, the garlic, the spices that we put on before. These potatoes look awesome. So now I'm gonna be pretty gentle and just take these out one at a time and just place them on the paper towel. The paper towel will help absorb any of the excess oil. And as these are cooling down, they'll continue to get more crispy. Anytime you put something in the oven or the fryer, it's not as crispy when you take it out as after it cools for just a minute or two. Because as the outside cools, the starch hardens up a little bit, and that's really what makes it super crispy. And maybe I can actually use the fork. I feel like when I was using those tongs, I was smushing them a little bit. So yeah, that fork was definitely the tool to use. And that's why you have many tools in the kitchen. So if you choose one and you think it's the right thing and it doesn't seem like it's working, do not be afraid to pivot. I think that's a very important cooking principle, is when you see something that's not working, try something else. Because trying the same thing over and over again and thinking it's gonna be a different outcome, that's the definition of insanity. At least that's what I heard. So now I'm gonna carefully transfer these over to my serving dish now that they've had a chance to cool down a little bit. And as I'm handling them, these things feel really crispy, super delicious. The color on them is unreal. I mean, these would be glad to sit at any holiday table. I hope they make yours. I can't wait to try one. And now some of that parsley that we chopped up before, just a really light sprinkle, just enough to make the color pop on top of these. But how amazing do these potatoes look? I can't wait to try one. Right before we try these, I'm gonna take just a little bit of this kosher salt and just sprinkle it on top, just for a little pop of that saltiness. It's really gonna take these crispy potatoes and amplify the flavor so much. I mean, what's better than crispy potatoes with a little salt on the outside? Take a look at this potato, how golden and delicious this thing looks. The color on it is unreal. And the reason we went with the Yukon Gold is the color that develops on the outside is way darker than what you would get with the russet, even though the russet might get a little crispier, but the russet will not have the creamy center that this will. So if we check this out with the knife test and just see how crispy it is, let's see if my mic can pick up on how crispy it is. I mean, this definitely has some solid crispiness factor to it. Now let's bust this thing open and see that creamy center. I mean, look how creamy and soft that inside is. I'm gonna give this just a second so I don't burn my mouth. Wow, these potatoes are unreal. I mean, I don't know what you're having for Christmas dinner, holiday dinner, or whenever you're seeing this video and making these for, but these are so good and so delicious. They will go with everything. Crispy on the outside, creamy on the inside. The garlic and herbs are coming through big time. This is an absolutely fantastic side dish. I'm gonna eat a few more of these potatoes while I'm doing that. Check out my creamed spinach recipe. That is another great side dish that will go with these potatoes no matter what you're having for dinner. I will see you there. Thanks.